In this example, we're going to look at departmental overhead rates and apply them to a specific job being finished. So the first thing it asks us to do is determine the overhead rate that should be used for each department in applying overhead costs to jobs. We see up here, we see that in Department A, overhead is applied on the basis of machine hours, and Department B on the basis of direct labor hours. So to determine rates for Department A and Department B, in Department A, we're going to use machine hours, and in Department B, we're going to use direct labor hours. So for Department A, we have total manufacturing overhead costs of $540,000, and we divide that by our machine hours of 18,000. That gives us a rate of $30 per machine hour for Department A. In Department B, we take our total overhead costs of $412,500 and divide that by our 25,000 direct labor hours that are estimated for the year, giving us a rate on Department B of $16 per direct labor hour. The next thing that we're going to do is apply overhead to job 399, determine what the total cost of job 399 is, and then what the unit cost per product manufactured on this order. You see here we're making 4,000 tachometers in job 399. We're going to allocate Department A costs based on machine hours. We take that rate we calculated of $30 per machine hour times the 250 machine hours assigned to Department A. And in Department B, we use the $16.50 per direct labor hour times the 600 direct labor hours in Department B. We add up the total cost for each department in this job in our direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. And then we add up the totals from Department A and Department B to calculate what the total cost of job 399 is. Job 399's total cost was $44,000. Our per unit cost is $44,000, the total cost of the job, divided by 4,000, which is the number of units that we made during this job. Our per unit cost for each tachometer is $11. In Part 3, we're asked to prepare the journal entries required to record the sale of 1,000 tachometers on account to ski craft boats. So we prepare our journal entries. Remember, we have two entries. We have the first one to record the sale. We sold this on account, so we're going to debit accounts receivable for $19,500. Our credit is to sales revenue. The second part of any sales journal entry, remember, is to record the cost of goods sold and remove that item from our inventory. We sold 1,000 tachometers at a rate of $11 per tachometer. So 1,000 times 11 is $11,000. Number 4 says, assume that actual overhead costs for the year were $517,000 in Department A and $424,000 in Department B. Then actual machine hours in Department A were 17,000 and actual direct hours in Department B were 26,000. We're going to determine what the over or under applied overhead in each department for the year was. So remember, when we record actual overhead costs, we're going to debit overhead for actual overhead costs. And then we credit overhead with our applied costs. So in Department A, we have 17,000 machine hours times our $30 per machine hour rate. And in Department B, we have a rate of $16.50 times 26,000 direct labor hours. So when we look at our overhead in Department A, we have a higher debit side than a credit side. This means we have under applied overhead by $7,000. And in Department B, we have a higher credit side than our debit side. That means we over applied in Department B for a total of $5,000. In our last example, we're looking at a company that makes 3 models of robots. We currently have a single overhead allocation rate using machine hours. We use our maintenance department costs of $100,000 and allocate those based on a total single overhead rate. So let's calculate that overhead rate first, based on machine hours. We have $100,000 in costs divided by our 40,000 machine hours. Gives us an overhead rate of $2.50 per machine hour. That's our single rate. Then it tells us that the company's cost accountant suspects that costs are being distorted, and we should switch to an activity-based system. Under our proposed activity-based system, we're going to have 2 activity cost pools, repairs and janitorial services. We have 2,000 work orders filed with maintenance every year. 400 are related to repairs and 1,600 relate to janitorial services. So the first thing that we have to do to calculate our overhead allocation rates is determine how much of this $100,000 goes to each cost pool. So we're going to use the number of work orders to determine that. So if we have 2,000 work orders, 400 of them going to repairs, then 20% of our costs go to repairs and the remaining 80% are for janitorial services. So of that 100,000, we take times 20% and we give $20,000 to repairs, and the remaining 80% or $80,000 is to our janitorial services. To figure our allocation rate, we're going to use the number of production runs for our repairs and the amount of square feet given to our production space for each robot model for our janitorial services. So for our repairs, we take our $20,000 divided by the total estimated number of production runs. And we get a rate of $50 per production run. For our janitorial allocation, we take our $80,000 in costs divided by the number of square feet that we have available for production. That gives us a rate of $2 per square foot. The first thing that we're going to do then with our overhead allocations is we're going to calculate the amount of maintenance department costs that get allocated to each robot model using machine hours and our single overhead rate. So our single overhead rate was $2.50 per machine hour. So we take our overhead rate, and if I lock this cell, I can copy my formula. Our overhead rate times the number of machine hours. I'm going to copy that calculation down and allocate overhead to each robot. Should add up to the total $100,000 in maintenance costs. As we can see, under this method, the A3B4 model gets the most overhead allocation, and the C3PO model gets the least overhead allocation. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to allocate overhead based on the proposed activity-based costing method and see how that changes our overhead allocation. So we're going to allocate our overhead repairs based on the number of production runs. So we have our rate of $50 per production run times the number of production runs. And for janitorial services, we have a rate of $2 per square feet times the estimated square foot used. Once we've applied the overhead for each activity, then we can total the total amount of overhead that each robot line is given, allocating our total $100,000 in machine costs. As we can see here, we flip the amount of overhead applied to our AB3B4 and our C3PO model. So using the activity-based system, we can see that the C3PO model uses more resources than any other model. It makes sense then for it to get the highest amount of the overhead calculation, as opposed to this plant-wide model, which is under-costing the C3PO model and over-costing the A3B4 model. So moving to the activity-based system would give them better ideas of what their true costs and true use of resources across their product lines are.